Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. Had a little bit of a disaster. Mini disaster. Disasterette. You remember what I've said about light and sun angles varying? Well, a couple of days ago I actually put a second layer of shade netting on there. It's just tucked over the top of the roof, which gives a very large gap between that piece of shade netting and the stuff that's up against the glass. Whether that's going to help keep the temperature down or not, I don't know. But yeah, that innocent little piece of glass there, which as far as the mounts are concerned, the mounts have fundamentally got their back to it. So it's no big deal. But it was a big deal for this. That's the new growth. And one leaf burnt and fell off, and the other one's burnt beyond repair. And it was sitting just there. So the light came in through that little corner. Now that would have been quite late in the day for the sun to have got round to here, but as you know, with the weather we're having at the moment, the sun is incredibly strong. And it's actually taken the leaves off the latest growth. So cheers for that. That's my fault. And something I normally do that I've completely forgotten this year, I normally go round on the outside of this pane with the white paint. And I just forgot this year. I just haven't thought about it. But I need to go out and do that now. And I've never put white paint on that paint, I don't think. But I will now, because if it can get in there, it's possible it can get in here. Yeah? So, yeah, damage limitation, but too late for this little one. So that's a whole new growth effectively wasted. Highly unlikely that a new growth without leaves would bloom, I'd have thought. I mean, that one still can, possible. That's my Nora Tokunaga crossed with Aberrans too. Anyway, it'll have to push up another new growth now, won't it? Oh, can't believe that happened. Now, don't all follow suit. I'm doing this as an experiment. As you know, my feeding regime this year, I use the MSU formula, yes, and I've been adding a bit of CalMag in to most feeds and varying my pH. But as I've always said, I'm feeding low and often. Well, I've just read a very informative article. I was actually looking up nutrient deficiencies at individual nutrient level, and that's when you find out it's a bit more complicated than that, because a deficiency with one can cause a problem with some of the others as well. And that's why the balance thing needs to be there, and I'm not going into that today. I'll be here all day. But this article, authoritative, coming from a reliable source, which I'm not going to say because it's not fair, because that puts an onus on that person's responsibility. And I've already said it once, I'll say it again, don't all follow me. You've got to make your own minds up. But during the growing season, with plants actively growing, some growers are more interested in the amount of nitrogen in their feed than the overall level of feed. And so as long as they have their balanced nutrient, the strength of their feed is geared up to how much nitrogen they want in it, if you see what I mean. So you have to work backwards. And I've just worked backwards. My MSU formula has 13% nitrogen in it. You know, which means that 87% is other stuff. Yeah? So anyway, this article recommended during the growing season around 30 parts per million of nitrogen. Well, let's say I was feeding at 100 parts per million, because I can only do round figures in my head without a calculator. Well, out of that 100 parts per million, if 13% of that is nitrogen, then that's 13 parts per million of that 100 is nitrogen. It's not going to be an exact thing, but it's a pretty close enough thing to go with anyway. So if I want around 30 parts per million of nitrogen, Do the maths in your head. Yeah? I'm going to need quite a bit more strength to my feed. And so from now, bearing in mind there's still a hell of a lot of growing season, I'm upping my level of feed. And although this is going to sound pretty dramatic, I'm doubling it. Yeah, so that'll take me in an individual mix ready to pour all over my plants. That'll take me from 13 to 26. That's still not the recommended 30, but you know, I've been feeding mainly somewhere around 120. I'm not going into the slow growers and cool growers, the ones that don't need hardly any feed. That's a separate issue. Not dealing with them today. I'm on about the stuff, all the other stuff, the stuff that's growing. You know, Cattleyas putting up strong new growth, stuff like that. Oncidium types pushing up new growths and flower spikes. Stuff that's at it, growing. You know, things like that, pushing up two stonking new canes. Yeah? Big new growths coming out. All stuff like that. Yeah? Vandas pushing up spikes and new leaves at the same time. Yeah? Actively growing, I'll call it, in some shape or form. And, yeah, I've been feeding at around 120 to 130 parts per million. Well, out of that, there's there's an element of the CalMag that I've added in, so the actual feed, the fertilizer that's been going in, is around 100 to 110. So I've only been giving my plants, you know, sort of 13 to 15 parts per million of nitrogen. And this article, which I'm going to run with for a bit because it sounded good and the logic behind it was good and it's been practiced, it's not a theory. I've got to get that out. Sorry, he just happened to be in a nice convenient position on a flat leaf. Yeah, so you know, to go from 13, say 15 parts per million up to 30 means I need to double the strength, really. So instead of hovering around the 120, 130 mark, yeah, work it out. I need to be well up 250 plus. I mean, there was a year, let's go back a bit, with whatever feed I was flipping using at the time, when I was feeding at sort of 300, 350 regularly. And it's only this year where I've dropped it right back, the idea being feed a little and often. But there comes a point when the little is too little. There's just not enough getting in there. I was chatting to a guy, this is also relevant, who did an awful lot of work out in the Far East, orchid research, laboratory stuff, and going off into the wilds, and basically that guy stood under under a tree full of orchids in a monsoon rain. Just before it started raining, he got all his wet gear out and his test tubes and stuff, and as soon as it started raining, he started catching the runoff, yeah? And then putting that to one side and labelling it, and then like an hour later, took some more, put it to one side, labelled it, hour later, took some more. You have to bear in mind, during this time, it was continuously raining, all the time, yeah? And he actually got surprising readings, and he surprised me when he told me. Now, he's a flipping nuisance because he always gives his stuff in microsiemens instead of parts per million. That's just how his mind works. But roughly, parts per million works out about, I think it's about 2/3 of the microsiemen value. But he was getting readings of 500 or 600 microsiemens on that runoff, which, coming down to parts per million, is probably about 300 to 400. Now that is high, and I queried it with him because it sounded far too high for the sort of values you'd get in the wild. And he said 3 of us double checked it day in, day out for quite a period of time, carefully recorded it all, and then did an average across the range. So for the start of the rain period, the middle of the rain period, and as the rain started to tail off after several hours of raining, we took those readings over many, many days and then averaged them out. And he said we kept doing it because we couldn't believe how high the readings were. We kept thinking we had a flaw somewhere, a fault. We were doing something daft and we hadn't twigged it yet. So they kept going, and that's what they came up with. And that's a lot higher than I thought. I'm glad I spoke to that guy. So that's what I'm doing. I'm doubling up. Yeah, I'm changing nothing down here. This lot get hardly any food. They've always done okay on it. So if it's not broke, don't fix it. But I have noticed some paling leaves in places. And you have to bear in mind, if I've got a nutrient deficiency with the feed I'm using, I've probably got a deficiency of all the nutrients, with the exception of the calcium and magnesium, because I'm up in that. Yeah? But there could be problems in several areas. And just looking up that article that I was reading, quite a few of the nutrient deficiencies show as paling or yellowing leaves. There just isn't enough in the plant to keep everything going. And one of the important things that needs to be kept going is the chlorophyll production. And deficiencies in certain areas will reduce the chlorophyll. Well, the chlorophyll is what gives it its bright green. So putting it all together, it made sense to me. Now this is entirely up to what other people do, but I'm upping my feed level literally to between 250 and 300 for a while, and I'm going to see what happens. I will still use the same percentage of CalMag as an additional little kick. Yeah. This article also mentioned that calcium and magnesium people have become aware, and with the work that was done at Michigan State University, that these elements are far more important than at first thought and previously understood. So that's just a little bit of backup for that idea. I like it when that happens. It means I'm not shooting in the flipping dark. Anyway, so I'm up in my feed, and it sounds dramatic, and it would probably pay not to do it all in one go, but what's getting watered today are the mounts. So I'm up in the feed on those. They only got a spray round yesterday, so they didn't get any feed yesterday, they just got water. So today I'm up in the level for those, and the next set of pots that will get watered are probably these. Nothing changes there, as I've said, that's all staying the same. That will be followed by the holy clay pots. Well, again, I can increase those halfway. I'm not doing it all in one go. It just seems a bit dramatic to me to suddenly double your feed level, but that's what I'm aiming at, so I'll do it in a couple of stages. And for the rest of the pots, obviously they don't get watered as often, so you know, we'll see how we go. Anyway, that's my theory, what I have. And I'm going to see how it goes. It is just a matter of it's a distant memory, and it's difficult to see changes. But those leaves are pale. Leaves on here, these are slightly pale. What about the mounts? Most of the mounts look reasonable. But they're certainly not a deep glossy green, although in orchids a deep glossy green on most of our orchids probably means they're not getting enough light. But there has to be a balance. Pale wishy-washy coloured leaves are not right. That's not really how they should be. So there's something, you know, it's either too much light, which will do it, or a combination of that, plus, you know, not getting the right balance and enough feed. And if you look at what nitrogen does within a plant and the effect it has on some of the other elements, it's pretty damn important. So here we go, let's up it and see what happens. If everything dies, I know where that person lives. I will find them. But yeah, I've just been doing a bit of work. I did say yesterday I had some work to do on the computer, and it was refreshing knowledge, backing up knowledge, double checking, and trying to find some new information. I have a go at that now and again. I thoroughly enjoy doing all that sort of stuff, but not all the time. I like to have a session. One of those was yesterday, so we'll see what happens from now. It's all good fun. And my usual bit added on the end, I got a little bonus. I was expecting it, but I just wanted to see it in black and white, as they say. That feed level was 160 parts per million of the MSU, and I took the parts per million up to 200 with the CalMag. Now that's a bit more than I wanted, but once it's in there you can't take it out. I don't suppose it'll do it. I was aiming at about 30 of the CalMag because of the ups level of feed, so to balance it, if you see what I mean. So that's now 200 parts per million instead of 120. So that's like my halfway house, shall we say. What I'm aiming to get at is around sort of 250 to 300. I'm pushing up to that sort of level. As I said, one year I was feeding at 400 parts per million, but that particular year I wasn't mucking about with the pH. But back to the little bonus. The little bonus is that with upping that feed level, my pH ended up a bit lower, and it wasn't that far off not needing to adjust it. So when I get up to the higher level next time round, I think the pH is naturally going to be sort of 6.4, 6.5, and I'm happy with that for 2 of my 3 feeds. I'm still going with a low pH feed. Yeah, I'm still going to add that one in. So every now and again I will have to lower the pH down to around the 5.7, 5.8, 5.9. I don't do an exact thing. It's as long as it ends up near enough. I get bored fiddling around with it very quickly, very easily. So a little bonus with upping the feed level, the pH comes down a bit to a natural level where I don't need to fiddle with it, which is good stuff. Right, we'll see how this goes. Changes will not be immediate, but changes in nitrogen level are quite fast. Yeah? I mean, even here, I've got paler leaves in places. Now, okay, these are older canes. These will become deciduous probably towards the end of this year. But even on the new growths, they are a little light. So I'm going to run with this for a while and see what happens. And as I said, changes in nitrogen levels can act quite quickly in plants. They do use a lot of it, especially when they're actively growing. So we'll see. Updates will follow. And hopefully we won't have a whole set of dead plants. No, I'm joking. It's not going to do that much harm, if any, and hopefully it'll be a bonus. But we've got to try it and see. I've got a kitchen session later today as well. Some things have been catching up with my annoyance levels, like things I've been meaning to do that I've now been meaning to do for so long, it's getting silly. So I'm going to have a kitchen session. Get some of that done later. See you next time.